We're here because we knew this was coming. Carol Rosin was told this was coming in 1974. I was read into these plans in the early 90s that they would at some point pivot towards a wild card situation of a threat from outer space to try to unite the world around a very militaristic level of unity, or rather than an enlightened level of unity. And we're at that point. We're at the inflection point. The good news is that our plans here are to create a documentary that will be released free to the world without a distributor, meaning that you don't have any intellectual property holdback on it. And if people want to put it out in its entirety, anywhere on any site in the world, they will do so, be allowed to do so. This isn't going to happen without us, we, the people, doing it. So I'd like to introduce Carol Rosin, my dear friend.
There are so many issues of concern that we all have. For me, as an educator, I was concerned about the orphans on the planet. At that time, I heard there were 30,000, and I have no problem, we'll get them homes. Now I hear there are 400 million orphans. And I hear 100 to 200 species a day are disappearing, and you know all the problems of the earth changes and the climate and the disease and the issues that all of us have personally as we're trying to survive and enjoy our lives. It's pretty hard. We've all had our challenges to get this issue out. So I really honor the people who are listening today and who are really paying attention to what Stephen Greer has put together, because this is going to be a fact-based presentation, not only today, but in the film that he's producing, in the courses that he's getting ready to teach, in the writings that all of us are going to be doing as we're all aging, and this travel thing has been very difficult during COVID and all the excuses that we have to be playing in the masquerade. We have a chance now to remove that mask. That's what the lies are. We can't keep identifying one enemy after another, that leapfrog game that we do. They may have weapons, so we have to have weapons. Well, ours have to be better, but they're going to have to think that ours are better, so we better be better than the ones they think we have. This goes on and on. This is ridiculous. It's a child's game, and all of our lives are at stake. If you don't get a ban on space-based weapons, the pivot can't take place to peace. You cannot have peace on the planet if you have weapons hanging over your heads.
We are here today to disclose the truth about a subject that has been ridiculed and questioned, denied for at least 50 years. The men and women who are on this stage and the some 350 additional military intelligence witnesses to the so-called UFO matter and extraterrestrial intelligence can prove and will prove that we are not alone.
And we have witnesses here today that have shown you that these extraterrestrial beings, that these craft that have come here are now not UFOs, they're identified flying objects, and we know that they have beings in them. And we have witnesses here who have told you that they can shut down our missile silos. They can stop a rocket going into space that's a test. We have witnesses here who have worked in the classified departments who have the courage to come forward here.
They actually photographed the UFO following the missile as it climbed into space and shining a beam on it, which neutralized the missile.
If you accept the multidimensional theory, it's highly likely that we've done a hell of a lot of damage. In somebody else's world, they might have even done more damage there than we did here.
There is no evidence, I wish to emphasize, that these life forms from elsewhere are hostile towards us. But there is a great deal of evidence that they are concerned with our hostility.
An alien had come off the craft and had been shot by a military policeman, and apparently was wounded and was heading for McGuire.
When I got out in 1989, we had cataloged 57 different species. You have individuals that look very much like you and myself that could walk among us and you wouldn't even notice the difference. The entities that we did catalog were in fact humanoid. Now this created a situation where the scientific community was trying to figure out why that would be the case, because you would expect that if life evolved on other planets, that they would take on some type of other being, so to speak, not necessarily look humanoid or be bipedal such as we are. But apparently we got quite a few of the species out there that are humanoid in appearance. And that creates a question that yet has to be answered by science.
These discs were hovering off the floor without any visible means of support. They were referred to as alien reproduction vehicles, also nicknamed the flux liner because they used high voltage electricity.
Genesis of that, we knew, was the beginning of them launching what Werner von Braun warned about, the hoaxing of an alien threat where they could unite the world around a militaristic response to this. And at that point, I realized, we're really in trouble. And we're going to have to do something to sort of get the narrative back. The first thing we did was to create, through the help of many of you, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which also became a #1 documentary on Amazon and iTunes and all over the world. And it's now on Amazon Prime. Anyone can see it for free if they have Prime, and on other sites. That was a call to action for grassroots. What Timothy Ikarov, the trainer of cosmonauts in Russia, just said, where we come together as a movement that are grassroots, where we make peaceful contact with these civilizations and bypass the national security state and take the matter into the hands of we the people, which is how it actually should be. And so that, of course, went forward. And about the time that, of course, picked up enormous momentum in the last 12 months, they then pivot towards this big problem with the Trump administration having been targeted at the level of the president and the vice president with very effective counterintelligence disinformation. When we get into looking at how this runs, you also have to go all the way back to the era of Ronald Reagan. And I met with a colonel not long ago, before he passed away, named Colonel Holman. And Colonel Holman had been on a committee back in the Carter transition, late Carter years and early Ronald Reagan presidency, to convince the president of the need for the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. And it wasn't really getting much traction as a policy initiative in terms of conventional geopolitical exigencies and requirements until they played the last card. And he admitted to me that they went in with cherry-picked and distorted information and convinced Ronald Reagan that there was an alien threat. And of course, that's reflected in his speech to the United Nations and a few other speeches where the president said, oh, wouldn't our job of uniting the world be easier if we could unite against a common threat, alien threat? So unfortunately, you had an actor from Hollywood and then a governor of California, Ronald Reagan, who was easy to move through cherry picking and spinning of information to go to the policy decision these classified projects wanted. This happens all the time in the Congress, in the White House, and in other capitals, because the people who run these unacknowledged special access projects, first and foremost, are masters of psychological warfare, psyops, and psychological and social engineering. Very good at it, extremely good at it. It's why the CIA director in 1953, CIA Director Smith, says, and we have the document, it's in my books, and it says that the UFO matter has a great potential for psychological warfare operations. So we have to understand that our democracy, which Eisenhower warned, was vulnerable to these kinds of machinations and extreme secrecy. that it could threaten our security and our peace. But when you look at this, you realize that we have a very big constitutional crisis. And so when I was approached by these folks to put a briefing together for the president and the vice president back in the fall, in the summer, I said, I'll do it. And I said, but you have to be our liaison. And it has to be handed to them off-site that does not go through the security system. And they were able to do that because otherwise it's been intercepted, put aside. So that group worked diligently. We're still close and working. Of course, obviously it's irrelevant in terms of that administration, they're out. And we also did about a 20-minute video brief summary that was handed to the vice president and the president, and was also sent actually to Russia as well for President Putin. And what's important about that is that we were trying to get the president to pivot away from the Space Force and the green lighting of weaponization of space, et cetera, and so on. I was horrified. My worst fear when I heard about the formation of the Space Force, and also when this counterintelligence group with Luis Elizondo and Chris Mellon and these other people went public, was that in fact, the train had left the station and that they had effectively pulled the trigger on the ramp up to this false flag operation. And in fact, that's what was confirmed. What was confirmed to me from people very close to the president and vice president is that they had been targeted with virulent, hateful disinformation about the alien threat, and that they were convinced that it was an existential threat to this world. Now, into that disaster, I stepped. Unfortunately, it also was a disaster of this election. So it wasn't easy. This is the original letter they wrote on my behalf to the president and the vice president, and this is the briefing document for President Trump and Vice President Pence. Now, our recommendation, just to be clear, was that they steer away from that narrative, that they do a joint announcement with other world leaders and religious leaders around the world, saying that we're not alone, that they're not hostile, they're concerned about what we're doing in space. We come together and keep all weapons out of space and develop a rapprochement and a diplomatic initiative to make contact peacefully with these civilizations so we can go forward. Obviously, that didn't happen. This was the scariest situation I've ever seen, because in other presidencies, we knew that they were doing things clandestinely, like Dick Cheney was on this committee of 200 or 300, along with George H.W. Bush Sr., and a number of other folks that I know about and some of whom I met with over the years. But they were sort of moving, they were keeping it sub rosa, underneath. And it was not in the mainstream media in that narrative, and it wasn't coming out of the government officially. That all changed. The beta test, the trial balloon for it, was the TTSA imbroglio, where everything they released. The Tic Tac had every story in the mainstream media was, and it's a threat to the national security, and it's a national security threat. And they're invading our bases, and they're interfering with our nuclear weapons. Everything was couched in a xenophobic, fear-based manner. And stories like that once were forbidden to be published in the New York Times. This subject was redlined, I'm quoting. I was told this by an editor of the New York Times. We don't cover this stuff. Suddenly, simultaneously, it appears in all the media, mainstream media, both digital, cable news, CNN, Fox News, New York Times, and globally in other media. That's when I knew they'd hit the button. They had hit the button go. And their lackeys and the shills in the media, who actually work undercover as journalists and editors, were ordered to carry this story. Now, they don't carry the Disclosure Project witnesses and videos or documents, which are much more dispositive and much more evidence than what TTSA released. However, they did it that way because the people who were the mouthpieces appearing in the media were all sticking to the talking points.